Good morning to you. For Telesur, I'm Regan Devines in Caracas, Venezuela. Thank you so much for joining us on our morning news program. Our top story takes us across to Ecuador again. The right-wing opposition continues to carry out actions aimed at destabilizing a government that is attempting to redistribute wealth and power. The 1% of people who control Ecuador's wealth feel threatened and reject social programs in favor of the majority of Ecuadorians. A few hours ago, a supposedly national action led by the right began. Indigenous opposition organizations indicated via social media that they had set up roadblocks on highways. President Rafael Correa defended their right to protest, but condemned what he said were their ill-advised motives.
Van a tratar de generar violencia, ¿no? Entonces, esos son los riesgos, porque no tienen.
They will attempt to generate violence because they have no other option. They have no popular support and they know that. If elections were tomorrow, they would lose. And that is why they are trying to block the elections of 2017. They know they would lose 3-1 if elections were tomorrow. They have no popular support, nor do they have the law on their side. But they want to overthrow a president because they don't like him.
O es referéndum revocatorio y el pueblo ecuatoriano nunca les va a dar las firmas y si llegaran a reunir las firmas.
The Bolivian President Evo Morales arrived a few hours ago in Havana. He is there to participate in the birthday celebrations of former Cuban leader Fidel Castro. Cuba has planned a massive celebration with concerts and tributes for Fidel on his 89th birthday. Upon arrival, Morales highlighted the great success and unity of the Cuban people, but he did not forget the ongoing problems at home, as well as in Ecuador, Brazil, Argentina and Venezuela. He said those countries are all facing destabilization efforts that are being planned in the United States.
We come on our own accord to join Fidel Castro on his birthday. So we wish him congratulations to our brother Fidel, his government, and all the Cuban people. Today, we will have a few hours with him. We hope to be able to share the birthday in a joint family manner. He truly has our respect and admiration, and that's why I came to join him.
The normalization of relations between Cuba and the United States has been hailed as a great victory for the Caribbean island. But thorny issues remain afloat between Havana and Washington. One of the most difficult barriers is the lifting of the internationally unlawful blockade which the U.S. imposed on Cuba over 50 years ago. Since it was arbitrarily imposed in 1962 by then-President John F. Kennedy, it has caused the island over $1.2 trillion in direct losses.
Cuba was excluded from international financial institutions, including the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, so sometimes we had to ask for loans at an interest rate over 20%, but the lending rates are only 4 to 5% within the institutions.
Former Cuban fighters, a historical generation led by Fidel Castro, who participated in the struggles of the Sierra Maestra, Bay of Pigs and international guerrilla movements, claimed that normalization with the U.S. does not mean the end of socialism in Cuba. They praised the normalization of relations as a victory of the Cuban Revolution, but also said that they didn't trust the United States because, simply put, history has taught them not to.
We think rapprochement with the U.S. is success of Cuban policies. They have been unable to destroy us. Now they will use a second lane, as they say. It's fine. They will come here precisely using the economic problems we have. They'll use them. Evidently, they will try to capture people, but we can also teach them many things.
In Brazil, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva blamed the United States for the economic crisis battling the Latin American country. The economic downfall also has President Dilma Rousseff facing her worst popularity rate since she took office. Lula reminded that when the Workers' Party came to power in 2003, the country was destroyed. Since then, over 30 million people have been taken out of poverty. Unemployment figures have fallen and spending in education and health tripled. He said the Brazilian crisis was born in the heart of the United States.
Our country is not at its best moment. We are going through some difficulties, but it's not President Dilma's fault. Neither is your individual fault. The only thing we know for sure is that the Brazilian people didn't create the international financial crisis. International bankers created it.
And while Lula expressed his ongoing support of Rousseff, the Brazilian president was participating in a rally attended by over 35,000 people. They all gathered to show their support for her government. Rousseff's administration is facing its worst crisis as a corruption scandal spreads and the country faces a downturn in its economy. Rural women and social movement members packed the main Garrincha Stadium in the country's capital, Brasilia.
What my government wants and needs is constant dialogue with you in order to create the policies through which Brazil becomes a country where women and men have rights and opportunities.
To Mexico now with our correspondent Clayton Khan. Now he explains that after the recent multiple homicide in Mexico that left a photojournalist and activist dead, public debate is again focusing on the country's poor track record of defending freedom of speech and the rights of media workers.
Isabel is a journalist who has worked both in the mainstream and alternative media here in Mexico. She says it is more important than ever to develop independent information spaces that do not echo the official line.
The authorities do one thing, and we have evidence that contrasts their so-called historic truth, like in the case of Ayotzinapa, or like the other cases that have emerged in misadministration of Enrique Peña Nieto. And so we seek to produce an alternative for society.
Like Isabel Dalia, a member of a citizens' radio project works in the same adverse environment. Since the beginning of the current administration, 2 years ago, every 26 hours a journalist is attacked, and until now, 16 media workers have been murdered.
Repression that one faces while being critical of this system of life that we have implies a risk towards our media makers. And so we call for a tone of unity and search for the legal arguments, but also the legitimacy that our communities can give to cover and protect these media projects.
Analyst Genaro Villamil argues that while statistics of violence toward journalists may reflect a need to control dissent or criticism, he also says the fact that the administration has spent more than $662 million in official publicity and image underscores the need to greatly influence public opinion.
The line of this government has been to touch up, hide, or lie, as not to affect the image of the president and the image of those that want to project Mexico toward the world. The only thing that they have achieved is the opposite.
With this past year's string of political corruption scandals and cases of grave human rights violations involving state security forces such as Ayotzinapa, Tlatlaya, or Tancuato, Villamil says levels of social irritation or discontent are reaching new levels.
Never before has the image of Peña Nieto has been more damaged, and never before has Mexico, instead of living the Mexican moment or the Mexican miracle, has lived this Mexican drama or Mexican tragedy.
Villamil joins a growing choir of critics, including international human rights organizations, that argue a new demilitarized strategy of Mexico's drug war is essential in undermining systemic corruption and abuses committed against citizens, especially media workers. Clayton Cantado Sur, Mexico City.
A massive explosion rattled a large area in Tianjin, China, killing at least 45 people. 520 more were rushed to hospitals due to injuries caused by the blast. 66 are critically wounded. The explosion is said to have been a chemical one. The tragedy occurred at a warehouse of a company that handles hazardous materials.
The power of the shockwave was so big, it ripped off the windows and doors. The roof collapsed and injured people. They were bleeding.
In Iraq, violence continues to mark everyday life. Explosions are common, but still shocking and deadly. Over 75 persons were killed by a bomb. The Islamic State group claimed responsibility for the attack that also left over 200 people injured. The bomb was detonated at a market in Iraq's capital, Baghdad. Smoke could be seen for miles. Rescuers worked intensely pulling bodies from the debris. Angry people gathered at the scene of the tragedy. Some cried out the names of victims and others cursed the government for failing to guarantee the safety of its people. The head of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, fired the head of the UN peacekeeping mission in Central African Republic, Babacar Gaye. Ban deemed the measure necessary after a fresh round of allegations of sexual abuse, including rape and excessive use of force by peacekeepers. Allegations of misconduct by UN troops are not new, but the UN cannot itself punish soldiers. Right groups claim this contributes to an atmosphere of impunity in peacekeeping missions.
I cannot put into words how anguished and angered and ashamed I am by recurrent reports over the years of sexual exploitation and abuse by UN forces. When the United Nations deploys peacekeepers, we do so to protect the world's most vulnerable people in the world's most desperate places. I will not tolerate any action that causes people to replace trust with fear. Those who work for the United Nations must uphold our highest ideals. Yet the outrageous and indecent actions of a few people tarnishes the heroic work of tens of thousands of UN peacekeepers and personnel. Every allegation must be thoroughly investigated.
Republican presidential candidate Jeb Bush was campaigning in Las Vegas, Nevada. His quiet little gathering became tense when protesters there began chanting Black Lives Matter. Jeb Bush was called upon by the protesters to address race issues as he took questions from an audience at the Pearson Community Center. There are no reports that he actually responded to questioning regarding police brutality and racism. Bush did take the opportunity to blame Hillary Clinton for the rise of the Islamic State group. He didn't offer details.
Thanks to our news team in Quito for putting together that world news package. Several hours ago, thousands of Cubans began celebrating the 89th birthday of former leader Fidel Castro. The celebrations will continue throughout the following hours and are a day ahead of the arrival of U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who will be there to formally reopen the U.S. Embassy in Havana. Fidel Castro governed Cuba for 48 years before falling ill in 2006. His brother Raul Castro took over and officially became president 2 years later. Fidel lives in a modest home on the western outskirts of Havana with his wife Dalia Soto. For more on these and other stories, please visit our website telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Regan Devines. We'll have another news update for you at midday.